It started with a scratching sound, software faint, coming from inside the ceiling. At first, Hannah thought it was rats, until the whispering started. Until she saw the fingers reach down from the attic hatch. By then, it was too late. Because once you hear him, he already knows you're there. And once you see him, you can never leave. Hannah Wells had never been afraid of old houses. She had grown up in them. Her grandparents' house had creaky floorboards, flickering lights, and cold spots that she never questioned. So when she found a cheap rental house in a quiet town, she didn't hesitate. It was too good to be true. A two-bedroom home, newly painted walls, fully furnished. The landlord told her the previous owner had moved out suddenly, but he never said why. Hannah didn't care. She should have. The first night she heard it, a soft scratching noise. It came from above. At first, she thought it was the wind, but as she lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, she realized. The sound was directly above her, in the attic. Long, slow scrapes against the wood, like nails dragging. She pulled the blankets over her head. It was just a rat, just an animal, just her imagination. But then, the whisper came. "I know you're awake." Hannah's blood ran cold. She held her breath. She didn't move. Then slowly, the attic hatch creaked open. Just an inch, just enough for something to look out. The next morning, Hannah stood beneath the attic hatch. It was closed now, no sign that it had moved. She stared at it, trying to convince herself she had imagined it. But deep in her gut, she knew. Something was up there. She grabbed a chair, stood on it, and pushed the hatch open. The attic was dark. Dust floated in the air like dead skin. She held her phone up, using the flashlight to scan the space. Boxes, cobwebs, nothing else. Until she looked at the floor. Scratch marks, deep jagged claw marks in the dust-covered wood, leading from the attic to the hatch. Her stomach twisted. She climbed down quickly. She locked the hatch. She told herself it was just rats. She should have left that day. That night, the sounds came back. But this time they weren't scratching. They were footsteps. Software slow. Pacing. Back and forth. Back and forth. Right above her bed. Hannah's breath shook. The sound was too heavy to be a rat. Too deliberate to be the house settling. Then a thump. Like something had dropped to its knees. Right above her. Then a whisper. "I know you can hear me." Hannah bolted upright. She grabbed her phone. No signal. She wanted to run, to get out of the house. But then she saw it. The attic hatch. It was open. And a hand was reaching down. Hannah couldn't breathe. The hand dangling from the attic hatch was pale. Too long. Fingers bony and thin like brittle branches. The skin stretched tight over knuckles that jutted out too sharply. It wasn't moving. Just hanging there, like it was waiting. Then the fingers twitched. Hannah's entire body screamed at her to run. But she couldn't move, couldn't think. The hand curled its fingers, tapping lightly against the wooden frame. Tap, 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 like it was mocking her. Then it started pulling itself down. More of the thing emerged, an arm, a shoulder, a head. The moment she saw its face, Hannah screamed. It wasn't human. It was trying to be. Its skin was stretched too tight, like it had been shrink-wrapped onto a skull. Its eyes were black, empty voids that seemed to pull in the darkness around them. And its mouth. It wasn't smiling. It was grinning. Wide, too wide, with teeth that were all the same size. Then it spoke. "You left the hatch open?" Its voice was thin, airy, like wind through dead trees. Then it started crawling down. Hannah ran. She sprinted out of her bedroom, down the hallway, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Behind her, thump, thump, thump. It dropped from the ceiling. It was chasing her. Hannah didn't look back. She reached the front door, yanked the knob. Locked. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, shaking too much to turn it. A breath slithered against the back of her neck. "Where are you going?" Hannah choked on a sob. The doorknob turned on its own, but it wasn't unlocking. It was locking. Click, 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 then cold fingers touched her shoulder. Hannah whirled around. The thing was inches from her face. Its grin never changed, not even when it tilted its head, not even when it reached for her throat. She screamed, but before it could grab her, she kicked it hard. Its body cracked, like old wood snapping apart. But it didn't react. It just grinned wider. Then it whispered, "That won't help." Hannah ran. She bolted down the hall, yanking open the door to the basement. She didn't think. She just ran. And the thing followed. Its footsteps weren't normal. They were too light. Like it wasn't touching the ground. Like it was floating. Hannah reached the basement and tripped. She crashed against the cold concrete floor. Her vision blurred. Above her, the thing stood in the doorway, watching, waiting. Then it started crawling down the stairs, on all fours. Fast, too fast. Hannah screamed. Hannah slammed her hands against the floor, scrambling backward, and her fingers touched something cold. A rusted crowbar. She didn't hesitate. The second the thing lunged, she swung. The crowbar collided with its head. Crack, the thing jerked back, but it didn't fall. It just tilted its head and laughed. A dry, hollow, inhuman sound, like it hadn't used its voice in years. Then it whispered, "You're not the first." Hannah's stomach dropped. She lunged for the basement window, kicked it open, and climbed through. She ran, didn't stop, didn't breathe, didn't look back. Not until she was at the house next door, pounding on the door. An old woman answered, her face paled. "You saw him, didn't you?" she whispered. Hannah nodded, panting. The woman's lips trembled. "You can't stay here," she said. "Once you see him, he doesn't let you go." Hannah shook her head. "I left. I got out." The old woman swallowed hard. Then she pointed to something behind Hannah. Hannah turned, and her heart stopped. The attic hatch in her neighbor's house was open. Hannah never went back to the house on Sycamore Street. She packed her bags, moved across the state, never spoke about what happened. She tried to forget, but every night at exactly 3:12 a.m., she heard scratching, faint, slow, coming from the ceiling. And sometimes, when she looked up, she swore she could see it, a hand slipping through the cracks, waiting, smiling, because the man in the ceiling never stays in one place. He just finds a new home, maybe yours. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to the channel and like the video and comment your thoughts about this video.